Clint Eastwood had always considered himself a man who feared nothing. He had survived Vietnam, starred in dozens of films where his characters remained calm even under fire. But today, standing on the sidewalk in front of a small house in the suburbs of San Diego, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: powerlessness. In front of him, at a makeshift table with a cardboard sign that read "Lemonade, $1. For Mom," sat a little girl. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy ponytail, and a book lay open on her lap, which she tried to read when there were no customers. She looked about 8, maybe 9 years old. But it wasn't this that caught Clint's attention. It was her eyes. They were old. Incredibly old for a child. He stepped closer. The girl looked up, and in her gaze, there was no childlike curiosity, but something like caution, even weary wisdom. "Good afternoon, sir," she said in a quiet but confident voice. "Would you like some lemonade?" Clint nodded, pulling his wallet from his pocket. "Yes, honey. How much?" $1. But she hesitated. "If you have more, I'll take it. It's for Mom." He frowned. "For Mom." The girl nodded but didn't explain further. He placed a $5 bill on the table. "Here you go. Keep the change." She took the money but didn't smile. She just thanked him quietly and poured lemonade into a cup from a large plastic jug. The drink was too sour, but Clint took a sip and nodded. "Good." "Thank you," she whispered. He wanted to ask more. He wanted to know why she was out here alone, where her parents were, why she was collecting money. But something stopped him. Perhaps that same look, the one that said, "Don't interfere." So, he just stepped back a few paces, sat on a nearby bench, and began to watch. Over the course of an hour, only 3 people approached the table. One man even laughed when he saw the price and said, $1 for lemonade? You can get it cheaper at a restaurant," and walked away without buying anything. The girl didn't even flinch. She simply waited for the next customer. And then he came. A man in a tracksuit, with a thick neck and an aggressive stride. He approached the table, leaned down, and said something sharply to the girl. Clint couldn't hear the words, but he saw her take a step back. "No," he heard her voice. "These are my money." The man laughed, grabbed the jug of lemonade, and shoved the table. "This is my territory, kid. If you want to work, pay." Clint was already getting up from the bench when the girl suddenly slapped the man's arm. "Give it back." The man froze at the bold act, then his face twisted with anger. "You little." He raised his hand. Clint was already there. "You'd better lower your hand, friend," he said quietly, but each word hit like a punch. The man turned around, saw the towering figure with cold blue eyes, and froze. This isn't your business, old man," he muttered, but with less certainty. "Now it is. Get out of here." The man wanted to say something, but Clint's stare was better than any argument. He spat, threw the can on the ground, and walked off, grumbling. "Take your girl. Or it'll be bad." Clint turned back to the girl. She stood with clenched fists, but there were no tears. Just anger. "Do you see him often?" Clint asked. She nodded silently. "And the police?" "They don't do anything. He says it's his street." Clint looked in the direction the man had gone, then at the girl. "What's your name?" "Emma." "All right, Emma. You're closing your stand today." "But tomorrow will be different." She looked at him, and for the first time that day, there was hope in her eyes. Clint Eastwood had always been a rational thinker. The army, Hollywood, business, he approached each with precision, first gather information, then a plan, and only then decisive action. But watching Emma collect the broken lemonade can, he felt something unusual, a temptation to act now and think later. "Emma," he crouched down to her level, How much do you still need? She looked up at him. $380. For what exactly? Emma pressed her lips together. My mom's sick. The medicine is expensive. Clint nodded. He didn't ask more. He had already seen the answer in her eyes, that same look he had seen in the eyes of the guys in Vietnam when they talked about those who couldn't be saved anymore. All right. I'll be here tomorrow at 9. The next morning, Emma was at her table as usual. But this time, Clint stood beside her, in a clean shirt with rolled-up sleeves, holding a sign that read, Lemonade, $5. Help Emma raise money for her mom's medicine. The first customers, a pair of elderly tourists, stopped, read, and exchanged glances. $5? That's expensive, the man grumbled. Yes, Clint replied calmly. But it's not just lemonade. What is it, then? A chance to show that not everyone in this town is scum. The woman suddenly pulled a $20 bill from her purse. Here. Keep the change, for your mom's health. By noon, their stand had a line of customers. Then he came, the same thug in a tracksuit. But this time, he had 2 friends with him. Oh, Grandpa decided to play the good guy, he sneered as he looked at the table. I wonder how long you'll last. Clint didn't even stand up. He simply lifted his head, and his gaze turned. Different. The way it was in the films when his character was about to do something unforgettable. Listen carefully, kid. I've lived a long life. And you know what I've learned. The thug unconsciously took a step back. What? That guys like you always lose. Because the world hasn't been on your side for a long time. The crowd around them grew silent. Someone pulled out their phone to film. You won't do anything, the thug muttered, but there was no longer any confidence in his voice. Really? Clint slowly stood up. Then come closer. And suddenly it was clear, this old man in a shirt wasn't afraid. More than that, he wanted them to try something. The thug spat, muttering, "You'll regret it," and quickly walked away. That evening, Emma smiled for the first time in a long while. We've raised $420, she looked over the bills. Clint nodded. Tomorrow it'll be more. Why are you helping? She suddenly asked. He paused. Because once, someone helped me. And that was the truth. Clint stood at the doorstep of a small house at the end of the street. The paint on the walls had chipped, and a toy car lay on the porch, the only sign that a child lived here. He glanced at Emma, who nervously twirled the keys in her hands. Mom. She doesn't always look very good, the girl warned. He nodded. In his 90 years, he had seen enough to be prepared for anything. But when the door opened, his heart tightened. The woman who greeted them looked like a ghost, pale, with sunken eyes, but with the same bright smile as Emma. Mom, this is the man I told you about. Emma ran up to her. Mr. Eastwood? The woman's eyes widened. Emma said you helped her, but I didn't. Clint, he extended his hand. And the money has already been collected. He placed an envelope on the table. The woman, Sarah, took it with trembling fingers. When she saw the amount, her eyes filled with tears. This is enough not just for medicine. This is enough for the entire therapy course, she whispered. Suddenly, Emma hugged Clint. He froze. He had received many awards in his life, but this child's hug felt like the most important. I knew you were special, the girl said. Sarah cried. Why? Why did you do this? Clint looked out the window, where the neighbors were gathering, those same ones who had walked by the lemonade stand just yesterday without stopping. A long time ago, in Korea, a guy gave me his last pack of cigarettes. He said, "You still have to live." I didn't know how to thank him. Now I do. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. The thug in a tracksuit stood in front of the crowd, but now there was no confidence in his behavior. We wanted to help too, he mumbled, handing Sarah a copy of the money. But it was certainly the beginning of something good. A month later, Clint returned to the same suburb. His pickup stopped in front of the renovated house, now with a fresh coat of white paint on the walls and a flower bed under the windows. Sarah was sitting on the porch, but now with rosy cheeks and a lively sparkle in her eyes. Emma was nearby, drawing something in her notebook. "So, how's our doctor?" Clint called out as he got out of the car with a large bag in his hands. "Mr. Eastwood." Emma jumped up to him, while Sarah just shook her head. "You said just Clint." "Well then, Clint." He placed the bag on the table. Inside was a new, professional lemonade stand, a mini kiosk with a tent and rain cover. This. Emma couldn't believe it. For business. Now you're an official entrepreneur. Sarah cried. But these were tears of joy. Meanwhile, the former thug, Tommy, appeared on the street. He hesitantly approached, holding a box of oranges. I thought maybe we could also sell orange juice," he mumbled. Clint nodded. He knew, life sometimes gives a second chance. And the best thing you can do is give it to others. The next week, a new sign appeared by the stand. Lemonade and orange juice. 50% of the profits go to medicine for sick children in our town. And Clint now visited from time to just sit on the bench, drink a glass of lemonade, and remember that the most important things in life have no price. The first rays of sunlight touched the new lemonade stand as Emma was already preparing the first batch of drinks. She carefully followed the recipe she and Sarah had written together, Sarah, who was now strong enough to spend a few hours each day by her daughter's side. Tommy, the former bully, approached them, freshly scrubbed and wearing a clean shirt. "I brought mint from my grandma's garden," he said hesitantly, holding out a bundle of fresh leaves. "For a special recipe." Clint, sitting on his favorite bench, squinted with satisfaction. He remembered how furious this kid had been just a month ago. "And now, try adding a little honey," he suggested. "Like they did at that place in Arizona back in '63. Emma nodded seriously, as if this were the most important culinary advice in the world. She mixed the ingredients, took a sip, and her face lit up with a smile. It's delicious." The first customers were neighbors. Mrs. Wilkins from across the street brought homemade cookies. Mr. Goldman, the elderly barber, promised free haircuts for the whole family. Even the police officer who had once ignored complaints about Tommy stopped by to buy 2 cups. By lunchtime, the little community had gathered around a shared table. Sarah, who a month ago could barely hold a spoon, now laughed as she listened to Clint's stories about Hollywood. Tommy helped Emma count the money, part of which they set aside for the local children's hospital. "You know," Clint said as the sun began to set, "I used to think my best days were behind me." Emma took his weathered hand in her small ones. "And now I realize they were just different." The evening sky turned gold as they all watched the last customer walk away, waving goodbye. On the counter near the register lay Emma's book, the same one she'd started with. Only now, the cover read, "Diary of a Business Lady." And on the bench by the house, where a lonely old man had once sat, there was now always room for anyone who needed a kind word. Or a glass of perfect lemonade.